Hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon for the 5 mistakes unsuccessful builders make and how you can avoid them. I'm Holly Gibson, Senior Product Specialist here at UDA Technologies, joined by my colleague Jordan Davis, also Senior Product Specialist here at UDA.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today.
And we are super excited to discuss this topic with you today. You know, anyone who has spent time in the industry knows that mistakes are inevitable. As we were preparing for this webinar and looking at some of the experiences and stories that we've heard about, if you're new to UDA or Construction Online, we've been doing this for over 2 decades. And during that time have grown to serve over 750,000 of you all over the world, countless conversations with builders, with contractors, with subcontractors, during that time. So we've definitely heard a lot and seen a lot, both in terms of, successes that people were having and also some of the mistakes that they had made along the way. So we really want to share that insight with you today. This can be really costly, to your process in terms of how these mistakes play out on a project. Even more so, it can be pretty costly on the bigger picture business side of things for your whole company. So we really want to be able to jump in and discuss what we've learned, what we see the top 5 mistakes being in terms of severity and how commonly we do see those. And then, really be able to dive into how you guys can use Construction Online to avoid some of those mistakes as well.
We're really excited to share a lot of these lessons that we've picked up and learned along the way, but we're also in some ways more excited to find out, what you're hoping to learn from us today. If this is one of the first webinars that you've attended with us, welcome. We're very glad to have you here today. If this isn't the first webinar, well, you probably have an idea of where I'm about to go next. We really love to engage our clients and really listen to your questions as we work through the webinars. We like to run a very interactive live stream. So if you'll take a look at the GoToWebinar panel, you'll find a section titled Questions. Now, Holly and I are going to do our best, although we find in these types of webinars and classes that we run that we'll typically be hit with quite a lot of questions as we move along, and we're, of course, very thankful and happy to be able to answer those. But please do send your questions our way. We're going to be doing our best to weave them into the webinar as we work through them today, but also note that if we don't get to your questions today, we will absolutely be able to follow up with you personally one-on-one for a question that might have come our way that just didn't really fit in with the flow of the topics today. So again, take a look at the GoToWebinar panel. You'll find a section titled Questions, where you can really easily type in your questions or comments for us as we move through and send them our way.
Absolutely. So with that, let's jump in. We'd love to hear from you and really find out, what you've learned along the way, what things you'd like to see. As we prepared for this webinar, we put together some ideas of things that we wanted to be able to cover in Construction Online. Things like, accurate estimates and profitability, managing change orders, using checklists that are comprehensive and really set your team up for success, talking a little bit about project documentation and showing you some ideas for how to use Construction Online for that. But I think as we go ahead and jump in and get started, what we really want to focus on a little bit first, though, is where does that come from? How do we decide on those topics? And it really comes back to some of the most common mistakes and challenges and oversights that we have seen people make or have had people tell us about, and some of them are hefty topics and some of them are simple mistakes. So there's kind of a lot of variety here, but I think when we were kind of looking for like what that number one thing is, it's hard to narrow down, but just to talk about some of the challenges that we've seen, I think the first one is mistaking cash flow for profitability. I feel like we see this one a lot where it's not unusual for me to talk to someone, especially who's not using a system like Construction Online, and they'll tell me that they're not really sure until the job is over and done with if it was profitable. They don't know along the way how the budget is doing, and sometimes months after the project is over. Sometimes I even hear that from people who are using ConstructionOnline to put together a detailed estimate. They're really focusing on getting that front part right with the estimate and the proposal, but don't really invest much time in job costing along the way. And we see that kind of creates a false sense of security when you have a lot of projects. It's easy to mistake cash flow for profitability, but those are really two different things, and that mistake can really feed into some of the others that we see, Jordan.
Yeah, and really starting from some of the reasons that this can happen, it's not uncommon at all for companies to just lack the visibility to even see what their expected profitability should be on their projects, to see how much they're spending on their projects, because they're usually living in a siloed informational hubs of a spreadsheet here and a bill inside of an accounting system here, or a stack of receipts on somebody's desk in their office. And all of these pieces of information are these threads that are just floating out in the wilderness. Some things that we've worked really, really hard to implement inside of ConstructionOnline is really quick visibility on where a project stands in terms of how much has been spent for the project at a certain point in time, and how much has been billed for and been paid for a project at a certain point in time as well. And we've built in different ways to track this, whether you're using an accounting system like QuickBooks, which of course we know is really heavily used, or whether you're tracking the information manually. Both of these approaches are very quick and easy to do, and we've done a lot of work in making sure that this information is visible and shared across everyone on a project team who needs to be paying attention to this information. And I really think that that's one of the main reasons for why this is such a struggle for companies, is because they don't have insight into how they're performing on their projects from a financial perspective.
Yeah, and so what that does, to kind of think about what happens next. So like as we look at some of the things that you can do in ConstructionOnline to combat this, it's helpful to think through like what are some of the consequences there, because I think we also often think of it in terms of consequences for that one particular project. But what we found is that it really kind of steps over into other areas. It means that really you don't often know if you're bidding accurately. You're probably bidding already more jobs while the ones you have going are currently in progress, which means that if we're not seeing in real time how we did, how close to accurate we were in our last bid, it's hard to know that we're bidding the current one correctly. So sometimes you're really flying blind there as far as that goes. It also kind of takes away from the idea of we want to be able to see what's most profitable for us in terms of different types of jobs. And so being able to see that does require that we do job costing regularly. So we'll really spend some time today looking at the tools available to you there. Just to give you a preview of what else we want to talk about in terms of those mistakes that we see, because it may be as well that you're doing really well in some areas and not so well in others, which is also something that we often see. Some companies have the financials down, but really maybe are struggling in another area. So we've seen some additional things that we want to make sure that we have a chance to talk about today as well. I think the next mistake that we'll cover is really not documenting or playing a short game when it comes to how you document your projects. When we look at things like having a contract, that's important, but I think it's also important to know that just having a single contract does not equal adequate project documentation. So we see this a lot, Jordan, I know, with change orders not being documented properly. We see it a little bit with people being unsure of how long to keep documentation once a project is complete. It's easy to think about the end of the job as being, the end of the job, the end of the project. But really, to protect your company, you need to retain that information, make sure that it's well documented. And in fact, the further away time-wise we get from a project, the more important it is to have accurate documentation that you can look back on and reference. So that if any questions come up, you really have a solid game plan for the long term there. We also see sometimes that companies will create a silo of information around a specific role or area of the business. and that happens, across different roles. Sometimes that silo is related to the owner and kind of having a lot of experience that he or she keeps in their head and doesn't necessarily share out with others. Sometimes it's just not giving project managers the information they need in terms of what the budget is for the job or what targets they're trying to hit from a scheduling standpoint. Sometimes it's related to how things are done from an accounting or bookkeeping perspective that really creates that type of silo. So we really want to share with you some ideas today for how you can fight that and really give your team the visibility that they need and create a system that's going to work for everyone.
And also to encourage trust among teams as well. I think some things I've picked up working with clients over the years, Holly, is that there in some industry segments and even in some companies, one or two bad experiences can lead to a lack of trust among teams, which can lead to this information siloing. But really, the question would be, if you don't trust the people that are on your team, how can you as a team be successful? Mm-hmm. And this might be either a counterintuitive point for some companies, and this might also be extremely obvious for others, but I think it's worth repeating and hammering home that, your company, as it drives forward for your clients, is based around the trust that you all are going to get the job done and done well. And with that lack of trust comes information siloing, and really a breakdown can occur across different projects. It just doesn't need to happen.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So the next one was one that we see not so much related to one specific area, but sometimes related to either every area, or it's different for different teams, which is kind of accepting a certain amount of defeat with construction. A lot of times people experienced in the industry will really echo what we talked about in the beginning, is that, mistakes are inevitable, change is inevitable on a construction project, for sure. But what we see as a mistake is that sometimes in certain areas, that means that the team members responsible for executing success kind of accept a certain amount of defeat. Why have a schedule, or why update the schedule if we know it's going to change as soon as we put it in play? Or, why bother documenting this change order? We know this type of client, we know they're going to fuss about it. Let's just let it slide. Or, that sort of thing. So really kind of acceptance of less than what you want as a reason to maybe not set high expectations in the beginning. So we see that as kind of one of those mistakes that you have to think about. You have to kind of think about your team and what types of expectations you set, and make sure that that's not you, that you're not avoiding planning well because the plan's going to change. And then the last one is, not paying attention to potential new projects because you're so busy. And I think that really relates back to the first one, Jordan, where we're so busy, we have cash coming in, and maybe not paying as much attention to our next set of jobs or the sales pipeline, or how we're doing, or are we really building a better, future for the business.
Yeah, it's all too easy to be caught up in the day-to-day, especially when you are very busy or when you have a lot of projects either in the works or ramping up at the same time, which is becoming an all too common statement. I've been working with companies for quite a while now, and 2020 started off, it seemed, with a bang, and then all of a sudden there was a gigantic wall or stumbling block that seems to have either put a lot of projects on halt. Now, this isn't true for every company that I've worked with, but a number of people have told me that they really were looking for a record-breaking year in 2020, and then, of course, with COVID-19 and other elements kind of coming along in the second quarter, things have slowed down a bit. But, I've heard from a lot of people recently that things are really ramping back up, and they're looking ahead at a very, very busy third and fourth quarter for 2020. And when you're that busy, it is easy enough to lose sight of, well, what happens after that? Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm really happy we're touching on this point, because I was just working with somebody yesterday who said something along the lines of, well, we've really had great intentions to start working back towards our sales pipeline and really started to push into that, but we've just been so busy that it's one of those third order items, or it's the third item always on the list that we never make it back to. Mm-hmm. But really, that's the time in which a company is most vulnerable, is when things are going well, because if anything slows the business down, as we've seen in this first part of 2020, if you're not prepared, or at least have some type of plan and pipeline scoped out for that, well, you're putting your business in a needlessly risky and precarious position.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be covering all of this today in the next 40-45 minutes or so. We've got a lot of different topics to cover, and we're going to be moving at a pretty quick rate, but please do feel free to send us questions as we work through the different topics we have on deck for today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with that, let's go ahead and start looking then at some of the best practices that you guys can put in place to avoid some of those mistakes. So if we go all the way back to the top and we think about cash flow and profitability and thinking about the differences between those, I think we would agree, Jordan, that really the first step on that is to really invest and get in a good habit when it comes to job costing as the job is progressing. I think that's one of the things that we would recommend that teams focus on. Now, one thing that I always like to say is, hey, every successful project should begin with an accurate estimate, or as close to accurate as you can get. That's one of the goals. If you want to set up a project to always be in the hole, have an inaccurate estimate from the beginning, that's really hard to dig your way out of. So one of the ways that you can do that, of course, is to use things like templates, use insight from previous jobs to make sure you're on target with that, make sure that bids are reviewed well. But just starting strong isn't enough. We really want to look at job costing and how you can get, insight into those projects as you go along. Now, one thing that you can do here is take advantage of our accounting integration. So, with ConstructionOnline, you have access to integrate with both QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online versions. So we have been, again, doing this for a really long time. At UDA, part of our expertise is in that accounting integration area. So those are fantastic tools available for you, but you can enter those costs just within the estimate sheet itself if you're not integrating with an accounting system.
Yeah, that's right. So everything that we're talking about today, do understand that really the approach here doesn't really have to rely on using our accounting integration system. And in fact, I think it makes more sense to show how you can use some of the tools in the estimate, especially for companies that are just starting to use ConstructionOnline's financial system, or maybe those who have been using the estimating portion of the platform but aren't really sure or didn't even know that there were different job costing and financial tracking tools built right into the platform itself.
Mm-hmm. So as we open up our estimate, and we'll go ahead and go full screen here because I love the dashboards, but when I'm working within an estimate, I definitely want to go full screen and be able to see a little bit more of my estimate while I'm working. So it's one of the things that I like about working with the estimating here. Now this estimate, as we start to put some items together, of course, you can do things just like enter a base cost for each of these, whatever you need to do to get to your actual initial estimate or budget. What we see a lot of people do is save things like their unit cost within those templates so that they have historical information to reference baked right into the beginning of every project.
Yeah, that's right. But, like we'd mentioned before, setting up a profitable estimate is really just the first step. The next step, of course, would actually be to move into the job costing component of the estimate, which you can access by changing the column view. Now, if we try to display every single column in this estimate at once, the scroll bar at the bottom would become a little too small at this point, and we'd have way too much information on the screen. But really, once you've actually built out the estimate and it's in a great state and you've you're now under contract, well, the next step, of course, Holly did mention, is to really start working through tracking your actual costs. This really isn't something you should be putting off until the end of the project.
No, it's definitely not. So you can see on my screen here, I have my actuals column displayed, and that's going to be displayed by default on your job costing view because I like to integrate with QuickBooks, and in this case, I'm integrated with QuickBooks Online. I also have a QuickBooks actuals column that's displayed. Now, what we recommend here, and I love this workflow with the QuickBooks integration, is your steps here should be create a solid, accurate estimate. When that's ready, you're going to send that estimate over to QuickBooks if you're using QuickBooks. Then you're going to come in and create QuickBooks purchase orders, and you can do that right from ConstructionOnline. So I can come in, create a PO for QuickBooks, and that's going to come into my committed cost column there. And that's important because we're establishing a baseline of what we're actually committing to pay out our vendors or subcontractors for each of these sections, so that when we receive their invoices, we have a point of comparison. I found that QuickBooks Online, which I've worked in several times over the last couple of weeks, has a great way for me to just go in, convert that purchase order to a bill. So I receive the invoice from the sub, I can make sure it matches up, convert that to a bill, pay them that way, and then pull those actuals right back into my estimate. So it makes job costing easy. I'm not having to go in and hand enter or create a complex system of codes or anything like that. It just all matches up. Not a lot of manual entry on my part, and I'm able to get that great job costing insight right inside of ConstructionOnline.
Yeah, and the same is true for QuickBooks Desktop as well. I mean, the two function almost identically when comparing the integrations that we have available. It really comes down to a matter of preference or really what already exists within your current company's practices. Now, of course, the key that's really going to make this work is making sure that everyone working on the project understands the procedures or the workflow of how the estimate's going to translate across, how costs are tracked in those two systems, and how they'll flow back into the platform. It really doesn't have to be complex. I can say that with 100% certainty after working with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different companies to help them fine-tune their QuickBooks integration. We'll absolutely touch on that when we're discussing topic 3, not creating information silos. But really the first step to making sure that you're tracking not just cash flow, but profitability for your projects really is establishing a great practice of tracking your costs and your income and making sure that that's brought back into a consistent viewpoint throughout all of your projects. And ConstructionOnline does a great job of compiling all of that information for you without needing to spend time on data entry or making sure that someone is compiling and making sure your dashboards are perfectly correct. It really is going to show you great snapshots of where you stand on your budget in terms of how much you've spent and your billings on how much you've actually invoiced for and how much you've been paid at this point. It gives you some good insights into things like over or under billings, so you can quickly see percentages of how far along you are into your costs versus your invoiced amounts and your balance to finish as well. And all of this is very, very difficult to track manually. I've seen some companies try to do it. It is a monumental task, and it really, really is one of the reasons why it's so easy to mistake cash flow for profitability. It's just a tidal wave of information to keep up with.
Well, and the irony is that the busier you become and more successful, especially as you're growing, the more likely that is to happen. You're busy, there's money coming in, more and more projects start coming, but that really doesn't create the buffer that you need for your company in terms of being able to then weather different types of times, or make sure that you're scaling and growing in such a way that's going to be good for the company long term. Having that new cash coming in can kind of cover up all sorts of things, on current or past projects. So you don't want to get to the end of the year or tax time or whenever it is that you sit down and look at the books and realize that 2 or 3 of the projects actually maybe got half the profitability that you thought, or half the margin that you thought was going to happen, or sometimes even less than that. Because what that means is then every job you're doing in the future is going to be just to dig out of that profitability hole. And that's true no matter how much cash is coming in.
Yeah, and so whether or not you're using the integrations, we really want to encourage you as kind of the first step to combat against this is just to get into a good habit of tracking. Use the different financial tracking columns in your estimates to enter in actual costs throughout the estimate or import them, and make sure that you're also doing the same on the billing side, on the invoicing side as well, making sure that you're keeping track of your income on your projects as well. With these two in place, it's really not difficult to start to see the information, and that's really the outcome that we're looking for here is just visibility. How are we doing on our project? projects
Yeah.
without waiting or begging for a report from somebody, 3 months after the job's complete.
Well, and that's the thing about getting into the correct habit is then the information is there for everyone who needs it. There are two more things that I want to touch on. One, and we're having some great questions come in, so definitely keep those coming. We're trying to get to as many of those as we can, kind of going through these topics. But one is, someone here wants to see some examples of cost entry. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. Within my QuickBooks integration settings here, I can adjust my calculation method. So right now my remaining is always going to be calculated against my QuickBooks actuals. If you want to see what that looks like if I'm manually entering the amount, we'll go ahead and save that. And really it's just as simple as typing a number into this column. So if we come in, we find our actuals here. And then maybe we record that we've, paid out $8,000 on this line item. Just enter that information in. Usually if you're using this method, it's because maybe there's not something as formal in place for accounting. So, or the bookkeeper is handing off paperwork to a project manager who needs to update it. So for whatever reason, sometimes, I do work with companies that don't want to integrate with QuickBooks. And here's what that starts to look like there. So you'll notice that now that I've entered just a little bit of information here on my actuals, I can see those are recorded on my dashboard. So I can see big picture for this Division 1 that it looks like I've only used 2% of my budget. That's all I've paid out so far. As more actuals are entered, of course, you'll see that circle begin to grow. And then if I want to dive into those details, I can then come right to that Division 1 tab here, head over to my actuals column, which we see recorded here, and then also start to see some granular information for this particular line about what's remaining, how much, what's my remaining balance here, projected profit on these items, etc. Now, in terms of linking to QuickBooks, that also is something super easy to do. We're really just going to follow the instructions from ConstructionOnline. I'm linked up with QuickBooks Online, so I would just kind of go through the steps here to link up my project. And really the biggest difference there is that instead of manually typing in the information, we're going to go ahead and import that over. We'll circle back to that at the end of the webinar today and maybe go through a couple of examples. It looks like there's a couple of people that would like to know more about how that works. So we'll definitely circle back to that one.
But we do have 4 other mistakes that we need to dive into.
Yeah, so we can go ahead and dive into, let's talk a little bit then about documentation. So let's kind of switch gears for a moment. So let's say that we do a great job here. So we master creating wonderful estimates. We get in the habit of job costing regularly so we can see what's happening. Another common mistake that we might make there, though, is either not documenting things appropriately or not really challenging or asking ourselves, is the amount of documentation I'm doing sufficient? Am I doing that well? So we have maybe a contract or a signed proposal. What else do we think, Jordan, needs to be documented? Because this topic can really cover a lot of areas. I know we want to focus a little bit on documenting change orders specifically because that is probably, for all of this documentation, that's one of the number one areas where we see people really not do it for whatever reason. And so that's something that we want to touch on. Where else would you suggest that people start looking in ConstructionOnline to improve the documentation that they're doing as part of their day-to-day project management?
Well, my mind instantly goes towards making sure that your team has a decent structure in the project files to understand where they should be saving documentation, period. I know that one isn't as flashy as some people would think, but really just setting up a great file and folder structure for your team to follow through on, it really signals from the front end what is expected to be documented in this project. Now, of course, you can write all the policies and procedures in the world that you would like, but that doesn't mean that people are really going to follow through. It's great in a lot of ways to go ahead and cut a path through the jungle in some cases with great projects set up on the front end from a project file standpoint. to make sure that your team understands the expectations that you as a project administrator have on documentation, whether that's from a photo evidence standpoint, whether that's from specific contract documents that you're looking for from subcontractors, whether that's some type of purchase documentation you're looking for from project managers or other people in the field. Whenever they make a purchase, perhaps you'll set up a folder or an album where they can upload receipts and other items like that. Again, pretty straightforward, but it is easy to overlook when you are running at 100 miles an hour to go ahead and equip your team with just a few pieces of structure and organization to make it easier for them to submit the documentation that you need, or for yourself, if you're a smaller scale company, to give yourself a reminder of different things that you probably will need for the projects you have moving forward. And that really flows into the next element that can aid you in documentation, and that really falls in line with the project tracking sections. And really, the next thing in terms of documentation that comes to mind for me is really logging work done on site, whether that's work performed by your own crews, whether that's work performed by subcontractors on site. We've made it in some ways laughably easy to quickly note down what work's been completed on site, and we've made it just as easy to attach photos to that. I feel like this is a topic we've hit on pretty heavily in the past few webinars, but for those of you who might not have joined those, our daily logging function is really easy to use and really to kind of spin off a question that a client asked me recently. Well, how often should I be posting logs?
Every day.
Yeah, daily.
Every single day.
It's in the name. It's implied that if you're working at a specific job on whatever day it is, you probably should be noting down at least what you did, because this will come back at some point. You have a project right now that 4 or 5 years from now, someone is going to require you to pull some type of documentation on work that was performed by either yourself, one of your crews, or a subcontractor or another trade. And you're going to need to prove that from your perspective, you did everything correctly. Or you're going to need to prove that it was inspected by someone from the city or municipality or whoever, and they signed off on it. We've made it really easy to save that information into the platform, and we've also made it really easy to recover this documentation as well. In fact, Holly, we don't delete data from the platform, ever. I think there's projects inside of ConstructionOnline from 2010. At this point, like when we launched the platform, right? Given that we've really maintained a lot of the structure of the platform on the back end, if someone needed to pull that project from 2010 for whatever reason, they could activate the project and then pull the daily logs from June the 5th of 2010 at that point. So really, you're setting yourself up for success by building in logging habits now. If your team isn't using this, well, we can share a story we've heard fairly recently from one of our clients who lost, how much money was it from just not having any documentation at all?
I think it was over $100,000 over and above the cost so far of the project. So it was it was a lot. Just kind of not having documentation in a arbitration setting. I mean, there was a challenge on the project. The documentation wasn't. They just didn't have it. They weren't using anything, and that was really why they were looking to get started with ConstructionOnline. And that touches on a webinar that we'll be having in a couple of weeks about some strategies for getting your team on board, because teams are made up of different people with different kind of experiences when it comes to technology, or different, maybe some people have a love-hate relationship there, but it's worth it because it's, getting your team and setting the right expectations to do these things really, can have long-term benefits or consequences. We did also have someone here ask about documenting delays, which there's a couple of different ways to do that, and that's excellent. That is something that you definitely want to be in the habit of doing. If it's a weather delay, you want to do an observed weather log here. And one thing that's great about this is it works hand in hand with the fact that we are already logging the weather for you at different points throughout the day. But I don't know about you guys, but where we are, some days it might be perfectly sunny at 12, and then we might be in the middle of a thunderstorm at 2. So, you do want to have the ability to enter some of that manually, and so that's what your observed weather logs are for, is to document weather delays. Delays that are coming for any other reason should be documented here under the delay tab. And these are great as well because you can go back and report on that. So like you said, Jordan, a couple of years down the road, we need to go back and get this information, we can. And that's really what I meant when you think about playing a short game or a long game, because some people are really managing projects well for short-term success. Maybe they're doing things correctly to get a quality project done. I mean, that's your reputation, so you want it to be wonderful. But remember that documenting some of the less glamorous things or paying attention to different types of documentation can not only help with a successful build, but can also really protect that then for 5 years down the road, you're questioned and you have that documentation. Now, we also have some other tools within the project tracking, things like your punch list and checklist. And Jordan, you mentioned earlier being able to capture like a signature. So let's say that we're doing some sort of inspection or walkthrough with someone. One of the things that we can do as well is come in and once we've completed, maybe gone through and checked off these items, they're good to go. You can come in and sign off on that punch list, and you can actually get as many other people as you'd like to do that as well. Just keep adding signatures, and there you go. So whoever you need to sign, if you're walking through with some sort of inspector, or maybe you and your sub or an owner or someone like that is doing it, you can go ahead and get as many signatures as you need here. Save it, and when you print these documents, those signatures are going to print at the bottom of those as well.
Now there's one question here I really do want to touch on this, because this is it's understandable, but it's also I don't think that people really mention it to us too often, but somebody finally asked the question. Someone said that the question was, well, we have control over our files and we can make sure we back them up if we store them locally, but what if for whatever reason the data's lost, or there's like a server crash or something for ConstructionOnline and the data is deleted? Well, to reassure you, first, we're not running our own in-house servers. We've partnered with the best in the world at actually managing web services, and we're actually hosted on a service that backs up everything inside of the platform nightly, and we to date have had zero data loss. I don't think we've ever lost a client's data from our own side. Now, they might have deleted their own information and then chosen to permanently delete everything, which you should never do. Don't ever delete anything, even though you think you might want to. Don't ever delete anything, but do rest assured that your data is safe inside of ConstructionOnline.
Mm-hmm. It is, yeah. It's something that we are proud of. It's something that we know everyone wants to make sure is the case. And really taking advantage of the benefit of pulling everything into one platform is something we want you to do, and want you to be able to do that with confidence. That is a huge priority for us on ConstructionOnline, and something that we're well prepared to handle. The other thing, though, I will say here is that some people, and these are all good practices, do like when the project is over, maybe before they archive the project, to just download out all of the files. And so we make it easy to do that as well. You can actually come in and download all the files together, so that if you've got whatever is saved in your file and photo section here, just comes out in a zip file that you can then save locally on your computer. So it's never bad to have some sort of backup or check and balance system with how you're managing projects, for sure. So we do give you some great options for that as well.
Yeah, one of our goals is to help you sleep better at night. So if you feel comfortable having your own copies of your files, you can grab those as well.
Okay, so looking at checklists really makes me think about the next mistake that we see, which is creating different silos of information across your company or organization. And we see this happening a few different ways, and it really is a problem or a mistake that ConstructionOnline was built to combat by being a collaborative web-based project management platform. Now, you can control permissions for your team, so that's definitely something that you can kind of control who sees what and make sure that that's set up how you want it. But just by its very nature, ConstructionOnline is designed to help you avoid the mistake of creating silos of information. Now, here's how that looks, or here's how I see that look. Sometimes I see it look like this. Someone who's not using software yet, I'll ask, well, what are you using? And they'll laugh, and they'll take their finger and point right at their head, and they'll say, it's all up here. And I'm thinking, well, I'm just not sure how that's going to work. What we see is that there are so many people in the construction industry who really do keep a lot in their head and are doing outstanding, amazing projects, have years and years of experience doing it. It's wonderful, but they're not sharing that experience with anyone else. So the success of the project kind of starts and ends there, and it's not really empowering the rest of the team. So what I would say there is, take the knowledge that's in your head, if that's you, if you're that owner, if that's you, take the knowledge that you have and expertise about how to do things well, and write it down. And then someone can make a checklist for your team as they're getting started with a project, so that they know, okay, the way that we start projects here is we follow these items on our checklist. We want to do these 4 things or these 40 things. Get processes in place that your people, can follow. Make sure that we're kind of creating some consistency there. Now, I know one of the other examples that we see sometimes with those silos of information is especially related to the financials, which can be a little bit of a touchy topic. But Jordan, talk to me about your perspective on that, because we like to encourage that, especially among internal teams, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm about to say some things that might be a bit challenging and might not specifically apply to you. So if you listen to what I'm about to say and you disagree, understand that I respect your disagreement. But what we've found and what we've heard for companies that begin to really trust their team, that begin to trust their project managers, their project coordinators, that begin to trust their superintendents with budgetary items, it really starts to set up a mindset among the entire team and the entire staff of your company that it's really not you trying to keep your business afloat and fight off against potential, what would the word be, like defectors, people that leave the company and take everything that you could have taught them and then build their own business and steal your clients away. Well, moving away from that mindset towards actually being a little more transparent with the budget and sharing expected numbers in terms of costs and the price in some cases, really helps the team understand, well, this is what we're aiming at as a team. It takes it away from this lack of trust from the team and creates us versus the problem, or us versus the challenges of a project mindset. And what we found over time is that companies that begin to open up that trust really start to see that their teams are understanding and working towards beating the budget. Right, so we've begun encouraging teams to really share the financials of the project, share the estimates, share the current budget state, and start building in performance incentives for every X percentage that you come under budget on the project. We'll kick a bit of that back towards you as a bonus. There's a couple of companies I've worked with who've started with that mindset and have scaled, and I've seen them grow into these powerhouse companies over the past year and 2 years, who really have had this mindset of sharing more information, making the actual project a competition to lower their costs while maintaining their margins and really beating numbers on the estimate, and really building in this idea of incentivizing better performance. It's a leap of faith for the company owner or the person that has either been burned in the past by somebody leaving, or maybe has just had a poor experience or two, but that's not typical in the 95+% of companies that we've worked with who've taken this step forward.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that, while you certainly do want to continue to protect your company and your information, what we've seen is that not giving project managers the information they need almost guarantee, it kind of builds in a certain amount of just struggle with, how effective they can be. And then on the other hand, what we've seen and heard from
Okay.
What we've heard from recently this week is I was actually speaking with someone earlier this week who has a wealth of knowledge and expertise. So it's a builder that I have so much respect for, about this topic, and kind of said like, hey, here's the webinar that we have going, and they were telling me that really they only began to see real impressive profitability on their projects when they took that step to share the budget with their project managers. It wasn't something they had been doing before, and they finally kind of got to a point where their number of jobs was scaling out to the point that they just couldn't physically do it every single day for every single job. And so, kind of talked about the impact that had on profitability. And you're right, Jordan, the most successful companies I see in this area are often just building those in as performance incentives. Everybody knows the target they need to hit. Everybody works hard to hit it and wants to be able to take pride in meeting those goals. So it's important to share that information. And I think the other thing on the financial side, I would say, is that often sometimes what we see, maybe not often, but sometimes that silo of information, kind of the other area where I see it happening is on the bookkeeping and accounting side. A really complex system will be designed around the bookkeeper's needs, because look, if you're really fantastic at accounting and bookkeeping, that often takes a certain attention to detail that is detailed for sure. So sometimes what I see is that teams will build a really complex costing or coding structure around the needs of the bookkeeper, but it doesn't necessarily give the rest of the team the information they need, or it makes it really difficult to execute. So we end up with a grand plan that's not necessarily useful to everybody on the project team for successful project execution. So we say, we want you to track those job costs, integrate with the accounting, make sure those systems are working together, but I would say don't veer too far in creating a system only designed to work for just one person on the team.
The most successful companies I've worked with have a harmony or an alignment between the estimating work, the budget management work that goes in from the project planning and management side, and the bookkeeping and accounting division or department as well. I mean, this could, there's so many different examples or ways I could explain this, but what's really interesting, Holly, is that there's no one cost coding structure or system I've seen that's like the end all be all, that's perfect, right, that works in 100% of cases. But what I have seen is a trend where people on both sides of the equation, right, where we have the estimating division working within a certain estimate structure, aligns with and has an understanding of what bookkeeping needs, and the accounting or bookkeeping division has an understanding of what the estimating team needs, and they both have an understanding of how to classify and categorize costs and how they're going to track income and how they're going to bill for the project as well. And when there's that level of understanding and alignment and partnership between the two, that's where we really start to see companies excel and grow and become very, very respectable companies in their own right. But when there isn't that alignment between the two, and when there isn't at least a level of compromise to really work towards building a better system for each other, that's when we start to see friction. That's when we start to see a lack of visibility within the projects, because, well, we've done it this way for 15 years and we can't change how we're doing things now. Why would we, right? But, I can say time and time again, I've seen examples on both sides. I've seen companies who refuse to compromise and refuse to change, and they're constantly, frustrated in the fact that they can't really seem to get the profitability in the projects that they want, or they just can't really get their teams on board, even with just understanding whether they're on a project. And I've seen the flip side where companies work together with each other internally to find out what's going to work best for both sides. Where are our non-negotiables, and where can we really come to an understanding of how we want to structure and think about the cost for our project. And those are the companies that I would rather work with day in and day out. And those are the companies that I do work with, at least every once in a while I find out how they're doing, and they're doing better than they were, a couple of months ago, because they're really staying the course, and they've built a system that works well and gives transparency across a number of different divisions.
Yeah. Empower your team. I think that the solution could be found there. And I think one of the great things is, for those of you that are already ConstructionOnline users, is that really the tools to keep that information visible and to help execute on some of that are really already built in. It's just a matter of kind of thinking about how you want to set it up. Which maybe leads a little bit into the next point that we wanted to talk about, which was maybe accepting a certain amount of defeat, or accepting that there's part of it. We know that mistakes are going to happen. We know that that's inevitable, not just in construction, but in anything. There will definitely at some point be mistakes that are made, right? But what we see sometimes, especially as people are trying to implement something new. So if you're getting new ideas from this webinar today that you want to try to implement, kind of guard against this mistake as well of kind of accepting that, well, you know what we made a schedule because we have to turn it in with the bid to win the job, but like we're not going to bother updating the schedule because we already know it's off anyway. It's going to change. It's probably going to, something's going to happen. Or same thing with job costing. I sometimes hear that. You sometimes hear that with change orders a little bit, that it's kind of just accepting a little bit of a status quo. And all of those things may be true, right? We know that schedules will change. We know that it's hard to be 100% accurate with the estimate in the beginning, so probably that budget's going to look a little bit different. We know that some clients will give you pushback about change orders, but talk about, Jordan, some of the benefits of pressing on anyway. So if we look at scheduling as an example, we know it's probably going to change. What can we learn from that?
Well, I've been thinking about, especially this topic with scheduling recently. There's a couple of companies I've worked with who refuse to build any type of dynamic updating into their schedules at all. Now, I'm a huge proponent of using the predecessor system within our schedules, and I'm not the only one. I've actually been doing a bit of light reading recently, Holly, some of which is things like the United States Government Accountability Office and their recommendation on how the government classifies a good schedule from a poor contractor schedule. And I've also looked into some other handbooks and things on scheduling from different countries around the world. I think I was looking from a guide in Australia. Recently, we've been working with some clients in the UK, so I was poking into some resources, some open source resources as well, and they all point to the same idea. If you're not building predecessors and dynamic updates into your schedules, then you're basically presuming that your schedule is going to fall apart and that you have no influence over any of the success of your project whatsoever. And this couldn't be further from the truth. What I see time and again in all of these resources, and with the companies that are doing very well from a time management and budget management's perspective, is that their schedules are very detailed, they're very robust, and they follow a very simple logic. And the logic is that each task is going to start and end at a certain day, and that there's going to be certain dependencies built into our schedule that are logical and that prevent any bottlenecks throughout. What this really lets them do is plan ahead so that any delays that impact the schedule now can be taken into account as they try to hit their target end date throughout the schedule at the end as well. But this all depends, and it goes back to the root mindset that we're tackling here, that, well, the schedule is always, like, things are always going to come up and it's always going to be delayed, so why would we plan out the project from start to finish and really target certain elements throughout our schedule? Well, because if you don't do that, you never will hit your target, ever.
Yes.
Your schedule is always going to take 20 to 30% longer, roughly speaking, than you'd projected it to if you're not really planning on sticking to the schedule and adapting to change as you move through the schedule, period.
Well, one of the things that I like to think about, because with an estimate, we'll often talk about learning from past estimates to kind of plan better. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong the first time. It just means that maybe the number was off, and so now we need to adjust it. One of the schedule reports that I really like here is the baseline report. So that allows you, if you're setting a baseline in the schedule, which would be a good best practice there. So I've set my baseline for my initial timeline. Now any of those changes are tracked, and then I can create a report that's going to allow me to see exactly where that happened. So the goal here would be to kind of look at my schedule, baseline start and end, durations, the actual start and end dates, and see where there's differences. I'm really just looking for this to be different here as we go through. So as we look at an area where, for example, we do have some changes, you'll be able to spot those. Hopefully what that does is help you understand like where next time you're going to want to maybe allow a little bit more time. Just helps you get closer to being on target there.
Yeah, for the companies that are running similar types of projects, especially if we're talking to production builders out there right now, you have a general idea of how long it takes to build a certain type of project from start to finish. But what this can do, especially if you use the baseline versus actual variance section, is identify key areas of the schedule that might have been controllable in the face of uncontrolled delays. Sure, we might have been delayed, 8 days because, for whatever reason, our appliances weren't delivered on time and we couldn't actually get them in. And then the rest of the schedule was cascading off of that and we were delayed. But the question would be, was there a point in time inside of the schedule where we could have recouped some of our losses, where we could have pulled it back so that instead of being 10 days late, we were only 5 days late? And this is the type of analysis that companies that are moving to the next level of sophistication are doing on a weekly basis. They'll take a look at their projects, say just after the project is finished, and start to identify areas that they can improve on for the projects they're doing now and for the projects they plan to do in the future.
Well, and this is a great example. So if we look at our appliances section, because what we're looking for is a number that's not zero over here. So we're looking to see which things were different than we thought, right? So as I look at these, you'll probably look for some of the higher numbers first. I can see that appliances was 10 days late being delivered. So maybe I go back and look at the delivery logs. Maybe I go back and look to see if there was, like what happened there. Was there a change order where it was the client a bit late and maybe approving their selection choices? Is it that I've had this issue before with the same vendor where things are consistently late? What do I need to do? So the goal here is to get that information. And I think that just because things like that are inevitable, that you'll have to make adjustments to schedules and budgets, and that's just how it goes. You want to be looking at two things. One, how can you mitigate a little bit the impact of changes that are for sure going to happen, and then what can you learn from them to take into your next project so that you're really bit by bit, improving a little bit at a time for every single project that you work on.
There is a subtle distinction to be made here, though, and it's an error that is, once you start looking into schedules, that is also easy to make. You can pendulum swing the wrong direction and say, well, we're typically delayed on this part of our schedule, so why don't we just extend the duration of the task just, maybe add 2 or 3 days in to make sure that, we finish on time. Well, I've worked with companies where they'll start building in, margins for error inside of their schedule, and then they find, wait a second, on this next schedule, we were delayed 3 days again. And so they extend the date out just a little more. Mm-hmm. And then the next schedule, they're delayed by 2 days. And it just starts growing where once you had a schedule that finished in 70 days from the start date, now you're looking at 90 days or 100 days out. And this is the second component, which is that when you start finding typical delays in your schedule, that doesn't mean that the right answer is to build in that margin into the schedule. It's to find out, why is this happening consistently?
Yeah, and fix that, which might be building more days in because you're consistently underestimating, but it most likely won't always be that, and could be that you need a different resource, could be that you need additional resources, could be that you need to improve a process elsewhere to facilitate that one better. So there's a lot you can learn by making sure that these are things that you track. Now, as we hit the top of the hour, we're going to touch on our last mistake that we talked about, which is maybe not paying enough attention to potential new projects because you're so busy. Jordan, you and I, when we were getting ready for this webinar, said, okay, we're doing a webinar next week. So next week on Thursday, we're going to be looking at some new features on our lead timeline, our sales management tool. So we're going to cover that in a lot of detail for you guys next week. For today, though, I think it's important maybe to think about some of the things that you can get out of lead tracking consistently. And of course, one of those is insight into your pipeline. You really want to have your process documented in your sales management tool so that you can look at your lead pipeline and especially maybe your opportunity pipeline and see what's there. What do I have coming up? What kind of dollar value or revenue are we projecting to have come in? With construction, these very often the projects themselves are 6 to 18 months long sometimes, so somewhere in between there. That seems about typical. Some of you it might be a little bit longer or shorter, which means that this this process is going to look a little bit different. But the goal here is to make sure that you're attending to this, that you're not ignoring this part of it, or this isn't something that slips because you're always so busy. And the thing is one common thing that I hear from successful builders will be, well, we're just having so much success, I don't really even do leads. Everything I get is referrals. We have more work than we can handle right now. Which may be true. You guys are doing excellent work out there, but I think what I would say here is just make sure you're paying attention. Are the ones coming your way the ones you want to do? Do you know that those are the most profitable types of projects for you? Are you assuming that that's the case? I mean, even if it's all coming referrals, just document them so that you can always look and see what you have coming down the pipe. And don't lull into a sense of complacency and not really attend to the business development, sales, or growth part of things. I think the other thing is when you think about marketing dollars and how you spend that, knowing that lead value by source, and we have a great report that can really help you break that down, will go a long way towards helping you know, like, where should we be spending our marketing money? Should we be investing in home shows? Should we be investing in advertising? If you're seeing that referrals really are your very best source, then maybe you want to invest in follow-up with previous clients, or seeking out referrals, or some sort of gift or something at the end of the project. There's all sorts of things you could do, but you need to have the information in order to be able to do it well.
Yeah, and that's right. And we've made it really, really simple and straightforward to not only track the sources for your potential projects and your leads, but we've also made it really easy to add your own custom sources as well. So if you do want to keep track of specific people that keep sending in leads your way, or you want to find out how well are we doing from a marketing and client attraction standpoint, you have a lot of tools at your disposal that you might not even know about. Mm-hmm. I think that's a pretty big key for people using ConstructionOnline, is that there's so much to focus on from the project management side that it is sometimes easy to lose sight of all of the other fantastic tools at your disposal. Now, of course, we're going to be drilling into actually using the lead tracking system, as Holly mentioned, next week, including some of the enhancements we've made to leads themselves to really give you an insight into what either you or your sales rep or sales reps or sales team, or really, I mean, the expansion level here for who's working with leads goes on and on. But it really gives you a lot of insight into what's actually going on with your leads. We'll be talking about that next week, but for now, really all of this comes back to a mindset. We've talked with clients who are doing really well right now. Right now, they're having record-breaking years in 2020. Irrespective of all of the other global conditions in the world, it seems like construction is somewhat immune, at least what I've heard. But just because people are in a great state, I've also worked with companies who have let this side of their business slip, and they're paying the price for it. They're still in business, but things are a little tighter because they didn't do their due diligence. They didn't put the work in to continue pressing ahead and managing growth and making sure that they were keeping a consistent flow of new business into their company at a manageable rate. And I really think that's a key here, is that there is also the tendency for when companies are having runaway growth to just let it run and to stop paying attention across the board because, oh my gosh, we're making so much money right now, right? But remember, mistake number one is mistaking cash flow for profitability, and really mistaking cash flow for success.
Yeah. So true. So true. I mean, we laughed as we were getting started because I really love these topics. I think that one of the things that software can help you do, like when you think about using ConstructionOnline, is it can help you manage the day-to-day, but it can also help you develop new habits that are really going to flow into different areas of the business. I mean, that's really the end goal. We want you to use ConstructionOnline and develop processes that help grow your business. We're looking to do that. Now, as we wrap up, and we're just a few minutes after the top of the hour, there are definitely still tons of questions that we haven't been able to address. You guys have really sent so many great questions our way, so I just wanted to touch on a couple of them. One person asked, are checklists the same as workflows, and how detailed can the checklist be? So to answer the question, I would say yes, checklists really are a workflow and something that you can that you can use as a workflow for the project. Now, for any of you who are using or have used our desktop ConstructionSuite software in the past, the checklist feature does not look identical to that workflow feature, but the idea is really the same. Setting up a recipe for success that you can use for things like different phases of the job. What do we do to open up the project successfully? How do we close out successfully? That sort of thing. You can be very detailed on the checklist that you include. So each checklist item can have sub items or issues that you can need to get checked off in order for the top level item to be completed. And for each item, you can also manage things like a resource assignment, due date, what the status is here. So there's so much that you can do with the checklist. That is independent of the workflow in ConstructionSuite. So those two aren't tied together, but you can basically take your suite workflow and load it here if that's something that you're wanting to do. It's a great way to approach it. We also had someone ask, do we have any templates for project startup? So I'm definitely happy to share with you guys what I have. I do have several checklists within my account and templates that I use pretty consistently, and so I'm happy to share those out with you guys. Afterwards, feel free to send me over an email. And let's see.
Oh, we do keep having people asking about the QuickBooks integration. We don't have enough time to really dig into it. We'll make sure to send out for anyone who wants to see the integration in process or in action. We'll make sure to send you some links. We've covered this topic pretty heavily.
Yeah, we will send that your way, and we're happy to work with you individually. Last question. Looks like there's a couple of people that just want to know, is there a trial version that they can work with? So for any of you out there who are not yet using ConstructionOnline, there absolutely is a trial version that you can sign up for. It gives you access to work with ConstructionOnline 100% free for 10 days. So you have a 10-day trial. We will work with you and do walkthroughs or training during your trial period. So our goal there is your success. So if you're thinking about trying it out, definitely sign up for that. Someone on our team will be in touch and we'll make ourselves your resources as you're taking a look at ConstructionOnline. As we look forward to the next few webinars, as we talked about earlier, we do have a session coming up next week that will dive into the new timeline view on ConstructionOnline's lead tracking. Following that, we'll have a workshop on how to conquer the 3 most common objections to software adoption by your teams. And then we'll jump into feature spotlights, introducing tax settings for ConstructionOnline within your estimates, change orders, and selections, as well as brand new project channels in the Envoy chat feature. So we're really excited about these workshops and some of the new features available to you with ConstructionOnline. For today, though, I think that wraps us up. We hope that we will see you at some of the sessions over the coming weeks. If you guys have questions or things that you'd like to discuss with us, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here at 800-700-8321 and would love the chance to work with you one-on-one. Until next time, though, thank you again so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Hopefully we shared something new, something interesting for you and your teams to really take to the table and start working through as we enter into the second half of 2020. Until next time, take care.